Have you ever wondered what could make an entire German regiment refuse to advance, even under direct orders from their commanders? What kind of warrior could turn hardened SS officers into trembling men who would rather face court-martial than step foot into a particular sector of the front lines? Before we dive into this incredible story that has been buried in classified documents for decades, I need your help. First, comment below telling me where you're watching from, and then hit that subscribe button. This channel survives only because of your support, and we're committed to bringing you these secret stories that the mainstream media refuses to tell. Now, let's uncover the truth. The winter of 1944 descended upon the Ardennes forest like a frozen curtain of death. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, covering the blood-soaked earth where thousands of American soldiers fought desperately against the German counteroffensive that would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge. But in a remote sector of the Belgian forest, something else was happening. Something that would never appear in official history books. Something that German survivors would speak of only in whispers, if they spoke of it at all. His name was Joseph Two Hawks, though the Germans would come to call him Der Schatten, the Shadow. A full-blooded Lakota warrior from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Joseph stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, with shoulders broad as an oak beam and eyes that seemed to pierce through the perpetual fog of war. He had enlisted in the spring of 1942, 3 months after his 21st birthday, when recruiters came through the reservation looking for men who could navigate terrain that would break ordinary soldiers. What the Army didn't tell the German High Command was that they had unknowingly recruited something far more dangerous than another infantryman. They had recruited a man raised in the old ways, taught by his grandfather, a survivor of Wounded Knee, how to move through the wilderness like smoke, how to read signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that would be invisible to white eyes, how to strike from darkness and vanish before the enemy could comprehend what had happened. The first incident occurred on December 18, 1944, 3 days after the German offensive began. A Wehrmacht patrol, 12 men strong, disappeared without a single shot being fired. The patrol leader, Oberfeldwebel Hans Kruger, was found the following morning tied to a tree at the edge of the German lines. He was alive, but his mind had shattered like glass. When his commanding officer demanded to know what happened to his men, Kruger could only repeat the same phrase over and over in a voice barely above a whisper. Der Indianer kommt in der Nacht. Der Indianer kommt in der Nacht. The Indian comes in the night. His 11 companions were never found. Not their bodies, not their weapons, not even their dog tags. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. German intelligence officers examined the area where they had last been seen. What they discovered defied their understanding of modern warfare. There were no shell craters, no bullet casings, no signs of conventional combat. Instead, they found something that made even experienced officers uncomfortable. 11 sets of boot prints, all leading in the same direction, all stopping abruptly at the exact same point, as if the men had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. But there was something else, something that would become the signature calling card of Der Schatten. At the base of an ancient oak tree, carved with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the wood, was a symbol that none of the German intelligence officers could identify. It looked like a bird in flight, or perhaps a spirit rising, rendered in a style that predated European contact with the Americas by centuries. I saw him once, just for a moment, wrote Private First Class Michael Donovan of the 101st Airborne Division in a letter to his sister that would not be delivered until 1946, long after the war had ended. We were dug in near Bastogne, scared out of our minds, expecting a German assault any minute. It was maybe 0200 hours, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Then I saw movement in the trees. At first, I thought it was one of theirs, and I nearly fired. But something stopped me. He moved different than any soldier I'd ever seen. No sound, not even a whisper. He flowed between the trees like he was part of them. Then he looked right at me, and I swear to God, Sarah, I've never seen eyes like that. They weren't angry or scared. They were just certain, like he knew exactly how the next hour was going to unfold, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do to change it. Then he was gone. Just gone. 10 minutes later, we heard the screaming from the German side. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Complete silence. The Germans never attacked that night. E.T. The pattern repeated itself with increasing frequency, as the Battle of the Bulge ground forward through the frozen hell of the Ardennes. German units would report encounters with what they initially believed was a small American Special Forces team. But the reports began to contradict themselves in ways that suggested something beyond conventional military operations. A panzer commander reported that his tank column had been stalked through the forest for 6 hours by at least 15 to 20 American commandos who moved through the trees without ever touching the ground. His second-in-command insisted there was only one man. A Wehrmacht captain swore his company had been ambushed by a force using weapons unlike anything in the Allied arsenal, primitive but devastatingly effective. When pressed for details, he described arrows, tomahawks, and something he called rope traps that appeared from nowhere. The German High Command initially dismissed these reports as the products of exhausted, frostbitten men seeing phantoms in the endless white landscape. But then, the bodies started appearing. On December 22nd, a German supply convoy was found decimated 15 miles behind the front lines. All 17 soldiers were dead, arranged in a perfect circle around their burning vehicles. Each man had been killed differently, with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of human anatomy and an almost surgical understanding of where to strike for maximum effect. But what disturbed the investigating officers most was the complete absence of panic in the scene. The men's weapons were still holstered. Their supplies were untouched. It was as if they had been lined up and executed one by one, and not one had attempted to flee or fight back. At the center of the circle was another carving, larger and more elaborate than the others. This time, German intelligence brought in Professor Klaus Adenauer, an anthropologist from the University of Berlin who had studied indigenous American cultures before the war. His report, classified and buried in Wehrmacht archives, made for disturbing reading. The symbol is Lakota in origin, he wrote. It represents Iktomi, the spider trickster spirit, but rendered in a way I have never encountered in academic literature. The execution suggests not merely cultural knowledge, but active practice of traditions that predate the American westward expansion. Most concerning is the precision of the carving itself. This was not hastily scratched into the earth. This was a deliberate message, executed with time and care. The implications are clear. Whoever is responsible for these incidents is not operating under the constraints of fear or urgency. They are hunting. By Christmas Eve, 1944, entire German companies were refusing to patrol certain sectors of the forest. Commanders found themselves unable to maintain discipline as stories spread through the ranks like wildfire. The tales grew more elaborate with each telling. Der Schatten could walk through walls. He could disappear into mist. He could kill a man from 100 yards away without making a sound. He never slept. He never ate. He was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost made flesh, an ancient spirit awakened by the blood soaked into the frozen ground. But Joseph Two Hawks was very much flesh and blood. He ate when he could, slept in frozen foxholes when exhaustion became unbearable, and felt the same fear that gripped every soldier on that God-forsaken battlefield. The difference was what he did with that fear. My grandfather told me something when I was 8 years old. Joseph later wrote in a journal that would remain hidden until his daughter donated it to the Smithsonian in 2007. He said that fear is a gift from the spirits. It sharpens your senses, quickens your blood, opens your mind to possibilities you would otherwise miss. A warrior does not fight against fear. He rides it like a horse, lets it carry him to places his enemies cannot follow, because they are too busy running from the very thing that makes them strong. The Americans knew about Joseph, of course. His commanding officer, Captain Robert Harrison from Atlanta, Georgia, had initially tried to rein in what he called irregular activities not befitting a United States soldier. But after Joseph single-handedly extracted a platoon of pinned-down paratroopers from a German encirclement, Harrison's protests died in his throat. The official report stated that an unidentified force created a diversion, allowing for tactical withdrawal. Everyone in the company knew what that diversion had been. He'd disappear for days at a time, recalled Sergeant William Chen, a Nisei soldier from California who served in Joseph's unit. Captain would ask where Two Hawks went, and we'd just shrug. But you could always tell when he was out there working because the Germans would get quiet. Not regular quiet. Wrong quiet. Like they were holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. And it always did. The truth was that Joseph operated on a level that made conventional military thinking obsolete. He didn't see the battlefield as a grid of coordinates and strategic positions. He saw it as his grandfather had taught him to see the Black Hills, as a living entity with its own rhythms and spirits, its own hidden trails and sacred spaces. While American and German forces battered each other in frontal assaults that gained yards at the cost of hundreds of lives, Joseph moved through the spaces between, guided by instincts honed over generations of his people. He studied the German soldiers with the same attention his grandfather had studied deer. He learned their patterns, their habits, their fears. He discovered that Wehrmacht units rotated sentries every 2 hours, creating a 60-second window of confusion during the change. He noticed that panzer crews always gathered for coffee at 0600 hours, their attention focused inward rather than on the surrounding forest. He realized that German officers were trained to expect threats from predictable directions, along roads and clearings, leaving the dense underbrush as a blind spot in their tactical awareness. And he exploited every weakness with ruthless efficiency. On December 28, 1944, a German SS officer named Sturmbannführer Otto Brandt made the mistake of boasting to his superiors that he would personally hunt down and kill Der Schatten. Brandt was a veteran of the Eastern Front, decorated for his actions during the siege of Stalingrad, known throughout his regiment as a man who feared nothing. He assembled a hunting party of 20 of his best men, all experienced killers who had survived the brutal warfare of the Russian campaign. They entered the forest at dawn. By nightfall, Brandt returned alone, his uniform torn, his face gray as ash. He submitted his resignation from the SS immediately and refused to speak of what had happened. His superiors, enraged by what they saw as cowardice, threw him in the stockade. 3 days later, he hung himself using strips of his own uniform. He left no note, but scratched into the wall of his cell were 2 words, repeated over and over until his fingers bled. Ist kein Mann. He is not a man. The 20 soldiers who had accompanied Brandt were found 6 weeks later when American forces advanced through that sector. They were buried in a mass grave carefully arranged with their hands folded across their chests, their weapons placed respectfully beside them. Each man bore a single wound, precise and fatal. At the head of the grave was a wooden marker carved with extraordinary skill, bearing each man's name, rank, and date of death. At the bottom was a message in German, carved in the same hand. Sie starben mit Ehre. Mögen ihre Geister Frieden finden. They died with honor. May their spirits find peace. This discovery would haunt Allied intelligence for years after the war ended. It suggested something that made military analysts deeply uncomfortable. Joseph Two Hawks was not simply killing Germans. He was conducting his own private war according to rules that predated the Geneva Convention by centuries. Rules that recognized courage even in an enemy. Rules that demanded respect for the dead, regardless of which side they had fought for. But respect for the dead did not mean mercy for the living. January brought no relief to the frozen hell of the Ardennes, only deeper cold and darker secrets. As Allied forces began pushing back against the German offensive, they started uncovering evidence of something that had been happening parallel to the conventional war, something that existed in the shadows between official reports and sanitized history. What they discovered would lead to one of the most classified investigations in United States military history. Lieutenant Colonel James McCarthy of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division arrived in Belgium on January 15, 1945. With orders to investigate what his superiors termed irregular combat activities and potential violations of the laws of war. His team of 6 investigators expected to find evidence of rogue American soldiers committing atrocities against German prisoners. What they found instead would challenge everything they thought they understood about warfare. We interviewed over 200 soldiers, both American and German prisoners, McCarthy wrote in his final report, a document that would remain sealed until 1998. The consistency of their accounts, despite their inability to communicate with each other and their vastly different perspectives, was remarkable. They were describing the same individual, the same methods, the same inexplicable occurrences. But more disturbing was what we found in the field itself. The physical evidence suggested a level of tactical sophistication and psychological warfare that should not have been possible for a single operator working alone. McCarthy's team mapped out over 40 incidents attributed to Der Schatten across a 30-mile stretch of the Ardennes. The pattern that emerged defied conventional military logic. Joseph Two Hawks had somehow managed to be in multiple locations simultaneously, covering distances that should have required mechanized transport, operating with perfect knowledge of German movements despite having no access to intelligence reports or radio communication. It was as if he could sense where the enemy would be before they knew themselves. But there was something else in the evidence that McCarthy's team struggled to explain. In 12 separate locations, they found what appeared to be ceremonial sites. Circles of stones arranged in specific patterns, small offerings of tobacco and cornmeal, feathers tied to branches with leather cord. At each site, the surrounding area showed signs of German military activity that had ceased abruptly and never resumed. It was as if entire units had encountered these places and decided, without orders or explanation, to route around them completely. I spoke with a German Hauptmann who had been captured near Bastogne. McCarthy's report continued. When I showed him photographs of these sites, he became visibly agitated. He insisted that his men had standing orders never to approach such locations, orders that had come from division command. When I pressed him on the origin of these orders, he claimed they had been issued after a reconnaissance team disappeared near one of the stone circles. The team was found 3 days later, alive but catatonic, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around the stones. Not one of them ever spoke again. The Hauptmann believed these sites were cursed. that they were somehow connected to Der Schatten, that approaching them would result in madness or death. The investigation took a darker turn when McCarthy's team began cross-referencing reports with German intelligence documents captured during the advance. They discovered that the Wehrmacht had dedicated an entire intelligence unit to tracking and analyzing Der Schatten's activities. The officer in charge, Major Karl Zimmermann, had compiled a file that ran to over 300 pages, filled with witness statements, tactical analyses, and increasingly desperate recommendations. Zimmermann's final entry, dated January 3, 1945, was found unfinished on his desk when American forces captured his headquarters. He had been in the process of writing a recommendation that the entire Ardennes sector be abandoned when something interrupted him. His aide reported that Zimmermann had received a package that afternoon, delivered by courier from the front lines. Inside was a single eagle feather and a note written in perfect German. Die Geister der Toten fordern Gerechtigkeit. Verlasse diesen heiligen Boden oder schließe dich ihnen an. The spirits of the dead demand justice. Leave this sacred ground or join them. Zimmermann had immediately ordered his staff to evacuate the headquarters. He stayed behind alone to burn his files. When American forces arrived 6 hours later, they found him sitting at his desk, his service pistol in his hand, staring at the eagle feather with an expression that witnesses described as profound existential terror. He surrendered without resistance, the only time in his military career he had failed to destroy classified documents before capture. When interrogated, he would only repeat that some enemies could not be defeated with bullets and steel, that there were powers in the world that modern warfare had no answer for. But the most disturbing discovery came when McCarthy's team interviewed Joseph Two Hawks himself. They found him at a field hospital near Liège, recovering from frostbite and exhaustion. He had walked out of the forest on January 10th, 3 days after the German withdrawal from the Ardennes began, and collapsed at an American checkpoint. He had been operating behind enemy lines for 26 consecutive days, without resupply, without communication, without orders. The interview was supposed to last 1 hour, wrote Captain Sandra Morrison, the team's psychological officer. It lasted 7 minutes. Two Hawks answered every question with absolute precision, provided exact dates and locations for his activities, and showed no signs of remorse, trauma, or excitement. His affect was completely flat, as if he were describing routine training exercises rather than weeks of solitary combat operations that had terrorized an entire German army group. But what ended the interview was when Colonel McCarthy asked him how he had managed to cover so much ground, to be in so many places, to know where the Germans would be. Two Hawks looked at him with those unsettling eyes and said, "I wasn't alone. My grandfather's grandfather was with me, and his grandfather before him, and all the warriors who walked this earth before the white man came and forgot how to listen to the land." McCarthy tried to probe further, but Two Hawks simply stood up, said the interview was over, and walked out. We didn't try to stop him. Joseph was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions in the Ardennes, though the citation was deliberately vague about the specific nature of his service. The ceremony was private, attended only by his immediate commanding officers. No photographs were taken. No press was invited. The army wanted to honor his courage, while simultaneously burying the reality of what he had done, how he had done it, and what it meant for their understanding of modern warfare. But the story didn't end with Germany's surrender in May of 1945. Joseph returned to Pine Ridge Reservation in September of that year, and that's when the truly inexplicable events began. Veterans from his unit started reporting strange occurrences. They would wake in the middle of the night, convinced that Joseph was in their room, standing in the corner, watching. but when they turned on the lights, no one was there. Others reported seeing him in crowds, in cities hundreds of miles from South Dakota, only to discover later that he had never left the reservation. German veterans living in displaced persons camps throughout Europe reported similar experiences, claiming that Der Schatten was hunting them still, that the war had not ended for him. The Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, opened a file on Joseph in October of 1945. The file, declassified in 2012, reveals that the government was concerned about what they termed potential security risks stemming from unorthodox combat techniques and possible psychological manipulation of enemy forces. They wanted to understand his methods, to see if they could be systematized, weaponized, and deployed against the Soviet Union in what everyone knew would be the next great conflict. They sent Agent Thomas Whitmore, a veteran investigator with experience in Native American affairs, to interview Joseph at Pine Ridge. Whitmore's report makes for unsettling reading. Subject was cooperative but evasive, Whitmore wrote. When questioned about his techniques in the Ardennes, he stated that he had simply done what his ancestors had always done: protected his people from invaders. When I pointed out that the Germans were not invading America, he laughed and said, "I didn't understand." He said that every war is the same war, fought over and over since the beginning of time. He said the land remembers every drop of blood spilled upon it, and those who know how to listen can hear the voices of all who died in battle, across all ages. He then asked me if I had ever wondered why certain places feel wrong, why some battlefields remain haunted long after the dead are buried. He suggested that perhaps the reason European powers could never fully subjugate the Americas was because the land itself rejected them, because the spirits of the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 10,000 years before Columbus would never allow it. Whitmore recommended that the investigation be closed. His reasoning was pragmatic. Any attempt to systematize or replicate subjects' methods would require a fundamental restructuring of military training that acknowledges spiritual and ancestral components of warfare. This would be incompatible with existing doctrine and potentially destabilizing to unit cohesion. Furthermore, Subject appears to have no interest in sharing his knowledge with military authorities. He views his actions during the war as a personal spiritual obligation rather than service to the United States government. He is not a security threat, but he is also not an asset we can exploit. But the file did not close. It continued to grow over the decades, fed by a stream of reports that defied explanation. In 1953, a German businessman named Friedrich Kohler died of a heart attack in Hamburg. His widow found a journal among his possessions that detailed his service as a Wehrmacht officer in the Ardennes. The final entry, written 2 days before his death, described a recurring dream he'd had every night since 1944. In the dream, he stood in a forest filled with stone circles and eagle feathers, and a tall figure with eyes like winter storms told him that he had been marked, that he would never know peace until he made amends for the blood he had shed. Kohler had apparently spent the last 8 years of his life anonymously donating money to Native American causes, trying to buy his way out of a curse that existed only in his own mind. Or did it? In 1968, during the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, a Marine Corps sniper reported encountering an older Native American man deep in the jungle near Khe Sanh. The man was not in uniform, carried no modern weapons, and seemed completely unbothered by the combat raging around him. When the sniper asked what he was doing there, the man replied that he was teaching, that every generation needed warriors who understood the old ways. Then he vanished into the jungle. The sniper later identified the man from photographs as Joseph Two Hawks, though military records showed Joseph was at that time living on Pine Ridge Reservation and had not left South Dakota in over 2 years. By 1970, the OSS file had been transferred to the CIA and then to a special projects division that dealt with what they called anomalous phenomena of military significance. The file was thick with reports from across the globe, all following the same pattern. Soldiers in combat zones reporting encounters with a Native American warrior who appeared from nowhere, offered cryptic advice or warnings, and disappeared without explanation. Sometimes the description matched Joseph Two Hawks. Sometimes it matched no one in particular, as if the figure was a template that different observers filled in with their own expectations. Joseph himself remained on Pine Ridge, living a quiet life. He married a woman named Mary Blackhorse in 1949, raised 3 children, worked as a tracker for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and became an elder respected throughout the Lakota community. He rarely spoke of the war, and when he did, it was only to other veterans who could understand. But there were moments when the mask slipped, when something ancient and terrible flickered behind his weathered features. In 1976, during the occupation of Wounded Knee by the American Indian Movement, federal agents surrounded the reservation. Joseph walked out to meet them alone, unarmed. He stood in the road for 3 hours without moving, without speaking, just watching. The agents reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they were being measured and found wanting. One agent later described it as standing before a judge who could see not just your actions, but your soul. The standoff ended without violence, and several of the agents involved requested transfers immediately afterward. One left law enforcement entirely and became a minister, claiming he had seen something in Joseph's eyes that convinced him of the reality of spiritual warfare. The last official entry in Joseph's government file was dated March 12, 1994. Joseph had died peacefully in his sleep at age 73, surrounded by his family. The attending physician noted no unusual circumstances. But that same night, in a veterans' hospital in Munich, Germany, 3 former Wehrmacht officers who had served in the Ardennes died simultaneously, all from heart attacks, all at exactly 0300 hours Central European time. Their deaths would have been unremarkable, except for one detail. Each man was found clutching a small stone carved with a symbol that German intelligence had documented 50 years earlier in the forests of Belgium. A symbol that looked like a bird in flight, or perhaps a spirit rising. The question that has haunted military historians ever since is deceptively simple. Was Joseph Two Hawks a man who became a legend, or was he something else entirely? Was he a skilled soldier who exploited superstition and fear to devastating effect, or was he a channel for something older, something that existed before nations and armies, something that viewed the Second World War as just another chapter in an eternal conflict between invaders and defenders of sacred ground? The evidence suggests both answers might be true simultaneously. Modern Special Forces operators study the Battle of the Bulge extensively, but they never study Der Schatten. His tactics cannot be taught in any manual because they required something that cannot be trained. A connection to the land so deep that you become part of it. A heritage so ancient that your ancestors walk beside you in battle. A faith so absolute that your enemy's bullets seem to bend around you, not because of luck, but because the spirits have decided you are under their protection. There are researchers who continue to investigate the Joseph Two Hawks phenomenon. They interview aging veterans, sift through declassified documents, visit the sites where Der Schatten left his mark. What they find is consistent. Joseph operated according to principles that modern military science cannot accommodate, that he achieved results that should have been impossible for a lone operator, that his psychological impact on German forces far exceeded what any single soldier should have been able to accomplish. And then there are the rumors that refuse to die. Rumors that Joseph Two Hawks still walks the earth, appearing wherever indigenous peoples face violence and oppression. Rumors that he was seen at Standing Rock in 2016, at Wounded Knee on every anniversary of the massacre, in the Amazon rainforest, protecting uncontacted tribes from loggers. Rumors that Der Schatten is not a person, but a role, passed down through generations of warriors, a spiritual office that someone must always fill. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the shadows between myth and history, between what we can prove and what we choose to believe. What we know for certain is this. In the winter of 1944, in the frozen forests of Belgium, a Lakota warrior from South Dakota became a ghost that haunted the German army. He killed efficiently, fought honorably according to his own code, and returned home to live a quiet life. The official record ends there, but every year on December 18th, the anniversary of that first patrol that disappeared without a trace, veterans gather at the Ardennes American Cemetery in Belgium. They stand in section 43, row 12, where a simple stone marker bears no name, only a date and a symbol, a bird in flight, a spirit rising, and they speak of the warrior who reminded the world that there are powers older than tanks and bombers, older than empires and ideologies, powers that sleep in the bones of the earth until the blood of the innocent cries out for justice. They speak of the debt every soldier owes to those who taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, that honor is not awarded by governments, but earned through integrity when no one is watching, that the truest warriors fight not for conquest, but for protection, not for glory, but for their people. And they speak of the question that haunts every person who has ever stood on a battlefield and wondered if they would have the strength to do what must be done. When the darkness closes in, when hope seems lost, when the enemy is overwhelming, will you find within yourself the courage of your ancestors? Will you become more than human, more than soldier, more than warrior? Will you become myth? Joseph Two Hawks answered that question in the Ardennes forest. His answer echoes still in the wind that moves through the pines, in the stones that mark forgotten graves, in the hearts of every person who refuses to surrender in the face of impossible odds. In times of darkness, we must remember that we are never truly alone. We carry within us the strength of all who came before, the wisdom of ancestors who faced their own impossible battles and prevailed. Whether you call it faith, heritage, or simply the human spirit, it is the same force that allowed one Lakota warrior to hold back an army. But remember this, with great power comes great responsibility. Joseph Two Hawks could have been a monster. He had the skills, the opportunity, the justification. Instead, he chose to be a guardian, to fight with honor even when honor seemed like a luxury his enemies did not deserve. He proved that you can be fierce without being cruel, that you can be deadly without being evil, that you can wage war without losing your humanity. In a world that often seems consumed by darkness, where evil appears to triumph and good people suffer, we must hold fast to our faith. Not the faith of institutions or dogma, but the deep faith that guided Joseph's hand when he faced impossible odds, the faith that there is something greater than ourselves, something worth fighting for, something worth protecting even at the cost of our own comfort and safety. That faith has a name. For Joseph, it was the spirits of his ancestors, the wisdom of the old ways, the sacred duty passed down through generations. For others, it might be different words, different traditions, different understandings, but the truth at the heart remains the same. There is a light in the darkness. There is hope in despair. There is strength when we feel weak. We need only to open our hearts to receive it. to surrender our pride and our fear, to acknowledge that we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. In the Christian tradition, that light has a name: Jesus Christ, the one who walked among us, who taught us to love even our enemies, who showed us that true strength lies not in domination, but in service, not in vengeance, but in forgiveness, not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to build. God's love surrounds us, even in the darkest valleys, even in the frozen forests where death waits behind every tree. We need only to call upon His name, to surrender our burdens to Him, to trust that He will guide us through whatever trials we face. The story of Der Schatten is ultimately a story about faith. Faith in something greater than ourselves. Faith that we can face impossible odds and prevail. Faith that our actions matter even when we cannot see the larger pattern they are part of. Whether you find that faith in the teachings of Christ, in the wisdom of your ancestors, in the love of family and community, or in the quiet voice within that tells you to stand up when everything around you says to stay down, that faith is the most powerful weapon any warrior can carry. As you go forward from this moment, carrying this story with you, ask yourself, what will you do when your moment comes? When the darkness closes in, when the enemy seems overwhelming, when every rational voice tells you to give up? Will you find within yourself the strength to become your own version of Der Schatten, not as a killer, but as a protector, not as a destroyer, but as a guardian? The choice is yours. The power is within you. The ancestors are watching, and God is waiting for you to step forward into your destiny. May you walk in light, even through the darkest valleys. May you find courage when fear threatens to consume you. May you discover that you are never alone, that you carry within you the strength of all who came before, and the hope of all who will come after. And may you always remember that the greatest battles are not fought with weapons of steel, but with faith, with love, and with the unshakable conviction that there is something worth fighting for, something worth protecting, something worth becoming. This is the legacy of Joseph Two Hawks. This is the truth Der Schatten left carved in stone and whispered on the wind. This is the secret that governments classified, that historians overlooked, that the world forgot until now. Remember it, share it, live it, and when the darkness comes, do not be afraid. The warriors are still walking. The spirits are still watching. And the light still shines, waiting for you to carry it forward into whatever battles lie ahead. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be hunted by a ghost? To know that somewhere in the darkness, beyond the trees, beneath the fog of war, there is someone watching you. Someone who never misses. Someone who has become death itself, and you will never see him coming until it is far too late. Before we begin this story, I need your help. Comment below and tell me where you are watching from. This channel survives because of viewers like you who want to uncover these hidden histories that the world forgot. If this is your first time here, subscribe now. We need your support to keep bringing these secret stories to light. The official records from the United States War Department contain thousands of citations, medals, and commendations from World War II. Buried among the endless paperwork of a global conflict that consumed 50 million lives, there exists a file that was classified for 37 years, a file that military historians stumbled upon by accident in 1982, hidden in a subsection of Pacific Theater operations, marked with a simple designation: Subject White Wolf. Unverified kills. 417. To understand what made this number so impossible, so statistically absurd, that senior officers initially dismissed it as clerical error. You must first understand the nature of warfare in the Pacific. The jungles of Guadalcanal, the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, the dense rainforests of the Philippines. These were not the open fields of Europe where snipers could find elevated positions and clear sight lines. This was close-quarters hell. This was combat where visibility dropped to mere feet, where the air itself seemed to conspire against accuracy, thick with humidity and smoke and the screams of dying men. The average confirmed kill count for an American sniper in the Pacific Theater was 43. The best of the best, men who trained for years, who had grown up hunting in the backwoods of Montana and Wyoming, rarely exceeded 70 confirmed kills throughout the entire war. And then there was Subject White Wolf. 417 confirmed kills in just 22 months of active deployment. The man's real name was Thomas Blackfeather. He was born in 1921 on the Navajo Nation Reservation in northeastern Arizona, in a small community called Red Mesa that exists to this day as little more than a few scattered homes along a dirt road. His file indicates he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighed 175 pounds, and had perfect 20/10 vision in both eyes. But these were just numbers on a page. They could not capture what Thomas Blackfeather truly was. According to the testimony of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Webb, who commanded the reconnaissance unit where Blackfeather served, the young Navajo arrived at boot camp in San Diego in December of 1941, just days after Pearl Harbor. Webb's personal journal, discovered in his estate in 2003, contained observations that read less like military assessments and more like the field notes of a man witnessing something he could not explain. Private Blackfeather does not move like other men. Webb wrote on January 14, 1942. During training exercises, he seems to anticipate the enemy's position before scouts report it. He tracks through terrain that leaves no footprints. The other recruits have started calling him Ghost, but I don't think they understand how accurate that name truly is. Yesterday, during a nighttime navigation drill, he led his unit through 12 miles of chaparral without a compass or map, arriving at the extraction point 17 minutes early. When I asked him how he knew the way, he said his grandfather taught him to read the stars differently. I did not pursue the matter further. By March of 1942, Blackfeather had completed sniper training with scores that shattered every existing record. His instructors reported that he could identify targets at distances they deemed impossible without optical enhancement. He could hold his breath for over 4 minutes. His heart rate, measured during simulated combat stress, never exceeded 67 beats per minute. And there was something else, something the instructors noticed but could not properly document in official reports. "He knows before we pull the targets," wrote Gunnery Sergeant Paul Morrison in a letter to his wife dated March 28, 1942. "I swear to God, Mary, this kid knows where we're going to place the targets before we place them. We tried to trick him yesterday, changed the pattern, moved targets to random locations, but he was already aimed at the spot before the target appeared. The other instructors are spooked. They think he's reading our body language or something, but that doesn't explain how he shot a target in Sector 7 when none of us knew it had been placed there. Records clerk made a mistake and deployed a target without telling anyone. Blackfeather put 3 rounds in it before we even realized it existed." The United States Marine Corps deployed Thomas Blackfeather to Guadalcanal in August of 1942 as part of the 1st Marine Division. The Solomon Islands campaign would become one of the bloodiest chapters of the Pacific War, a 6-month nightmare of jungle combat, where American forces suffered over 7,000 casualties. It was here that Subject White Wolf began to emerge from the realm of training range curiosity into something far more disturbing. The Japanese forces occupying Guadalcanal were elite jungle fighters, veterans of campaigns in China and Southeast Asia. They had turned the island into a maze of hidden bunkers, spider holes, and camouflaged positions that could decimate an entire platoon before anyone saw where the fire originated. American casualties from snipers alone accounted for nearly 20% of all combat deaths on the island. The enemy shooters were so effective, so invisible in the dense foliage, that Marines began to develop a collective paranoia. Every tree could hide death. Every shadow could be watching. Then the reports started coming in. Japanese snipers were being found dead in their positions, not killed by artillery or airstrikes, not overrun by infantry advances, just dead. Single bullet wounds to the head or heart, fired from angles that should have been impossible. The bodies were discovered in trees that American forces had not approached, in bunkers that had not been assaulted, along ridge lines that were still firmly in enemy territory. Captain James Donovan of 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, filed a report on September 19, 1942, that would later be classified and removed from standard operational records. The report described finding a Japanese observation post on Hill 43 that had been neutralized by an unknown friendly. Inside the camouflaged position, hidden beneath triple canopy jungle that blocked out the sun, they found 3 enemy snipers. All 3 had been shot through the left eye socket. The bullets had come from the northeast, from a position that was, according to Donovan's measurements, 1,800 yards away, through jungle so thick you could not see 30 feet in any direction. "There is no possible line of sight from that distance," Donovan wrote. "No possible way to acquire a target, let alone make that shot 3 times consecutively. We found no spent cartridges at the suspected firing position, no evidence of any American presence in that sector. When I asked my men if anyone had penetrated that far northeast, they looked at me like I was crazy. That entire area is hot. It's crawling with Japanese patrols. No lone operator could survive there for 5 minutes, let alone set up for precision shots. But someone did. Someone was there. And whoever it was, they killed 3 enemy snipers through triple canopy jungle from over a mile away. I have no explanation for this. I am requesting information on any special operations units working in our sector." The response from Division Headquarters came back within 48 hours. No special operations units currently deployed in 2nd Battalion operational area. Maintain operational security and continue mission objectives. But someone added a handwritten note at the bottom of the teletype. Check if Navajo Scout T. Blackfeather is in your sector. If so, confirm his position and activities. Blackfeather was not in 2nd Battalion's sector. According to the official deployment logs, he was assigned to a reconnaissance patrol operating 6 miles to the south, near the Lunga River. But when Captain Donovan radioed the patrol to inquire, the response was unexpected. "Blackfeather left our position at 0400 hours, the patrol leader reported. Said he saw something that needed investigating. He does that sometimes, sir. Just disappears for hours. We've stopped trying to keep track of him. He always comes back with intelligence on enemy positions that saves our asses. Yesterday, he warned us about a Japanese machine gun nest 200 yards ahead. We would have walked right into it. He said he could smell the gun oil in the rain. I don't know how the hell that's possible, but he was right. The nest was exactly where he said it would be." This became the pattern. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, reports filtered up the chain of command about impossible shots, enemy positions mysteriously going silent, and a lone Marine who seemed to operate by his own rules. The men who served alongside Thomas Blackfeather began to tell stories that bordered on supernatural. They said he could move through the jungle without disturbing a single leaf, that he never needed to use a flashlight because he could see perfectly in total darkness, that he sometimes spoke in Navajo to the trees before taking a shot, as if asking permission from something they could not see. Corporal Eddie Martinez, who served in Black Feather's unit, provided testimony in 1979 as part of an oral history project at the University of Southern California. His account, recorded on analog tape and later digitized, painted a picture of a man who existed somewhere between soldier and spirit. "We were pinned down on the Matanikau River, maybe late October," Martinez recalled, his voice still carrying the tremor of old fear. "Japanese had us zeroed in from the opposite bank. Every time we moved, they lit us up. We lost 4 guys in the first hour. Lieutenant was freaking out, calling for air support, but the weather was too bad. The rain was coming down so hard you could barely see your own hands. And then Tommy just stands up. Just stands right up in the middle of all that fire. And nobody hits him. Not one bullet touches him. He walks to the river's edge like he's taking a stroll in the park, and he stands there for maybe 30 seconds, just looking across the water. Then he raises his rifle. It's this old Springfield .03, same rifle every sniper used, but somehow his seemed different. Like it was part of him, you know? And he fires. 1 shot. The enemy guns stop. Complete silence, except for the rain. He fires again. Another position goes quiet. He fires 5 more times, and then he turns around and walks back to our line like nothing happened. 7 shots, 7 enemy positions neutralized. The lieutenant asked him how he could see anything in that storm, and Tommy just said, "I didn't need to see them. I could feel where they were." Tease. That's when I started to understand that Thomas Blackfeather wasn't like the rest of us. He was something else entirely. By December of 1942, Blackfeather's kill count had reached 93 confirmed, with an additional 47 probable. Division Command attempted to pull him back for publicity purposes, to put him in front of cameras, and use him for war bonds promotion, but Lieutenant Colonel Webb intervened. In a classified communication to General Alexander Vandegrift, Webb argued that removing Blackfeather from combat operations would cost American lives. Subject demonstrates unique capabilities that provide force multiplication beyond standard combat assessment. Webb wrote, "Request authorization to keep operative in field under special oversight. His presence has measurably reduced casualties in units operating within his effective range. Recommend creation of specialized assignment parameters to maximize tactical advantage." The approval came back with unusual speed, along with instructions that Blackfeather's activities were to be documented separately from standard after-action reports. A new designation was created, Special Scout Operations Pacific Theater. Thomas Blackfeather became the first and only member of this classification. He was given unprecedented freedom of movement, allowed to operate independently of unit command structure, and equipped with whatever resources he requested. He asked for very little: extra ammunition, a Navajo language Bible that his grandmother had given him before he deployed, and permission to perform what he called night walks alone in enemy territory. These night walks became the source of increasingly disturbing reports from Japanese forces. Allied intelligence officers intercepted radio communications and translated captured documents that spoke of the phantom shooter and the demon who kills without being seen. One intercepted message, dated January 7, 1943, and translated from Japanese by Navy cryptographers, read, "Unit requests immediate withdrawal from Sector 9. 22 men lost to unknown sniper over 4 nights. Bodies found with single shots. No evidence of enemy approach. Men report seeing shadow moving between trees, but cannot acquire target. Morale is completely broken. They believe the jungle itself is hunting them." American psychological warfare specialists considered using these reports to enhance the legend, to deliberately spread stories about Blackfeather to break enemy morale. But when they approached him with the idea, his response stopped the program before it started. "You don't use fear as a toy," Blackfeather told Major Robert Chen, the psychological operations officer who proposed the plan. "Fear is a living thing. You feed it, it grows beyond your control. What I do out there, it's not about spreading terror. It's about protecting my brothers. Every enemy soldier I take out is one less bullet that might find an American. Don't make me into a monster for your propaganda. There are already enough monsters in this war." The Major's report on the conversation noted that Blackfeather's eyes had changed color while he spoke, shifting from dark brown to something lighter, almost amber, though the Major later admitted this might have been a trick of the lamplight in the tent. He also noted that the temperature in the tent seemed to drop noticeably during their discussion, despite the tropical heat outside. The psychological operations program regarding Subject White Wolf was permanently shelved. By the time American forces secured Guadalcanal in February of 1943, Blackfeather's confirmed kill count stood at 147. He had operated for 6 months in one of the most hostile combat environments in modern warfare and had not received a single wound. Not a scratch. Other snipers in the division had been killed or wounded at an alarming rate. The average survival time for a sniper in the Pacific Theater was calculated at 4 months. Blackfeather had tripled that and seemed to grow more effective, more precise, more inexplicably unstoppable with each passing week. The Marine Corps attempted to award him the Medal of Honor for actions on Guadalcanal, but Blackfeather refused the ceremony. According to witnesses, he told the commanding general that accepting recognition for doing what the spirits had prepared him to do would be an insult to his ancestors. The medal was issued anyway, filed in his classified record, but never publicly announced. To this day, Thomas Blackfeather is not listed among Medal of Honor recipients, though the physical medal exists in a secure archive at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri. From Guadalcanal, Blackfeather deployed to New Georgia, then to Bougainville. The kills continued to accumulate. 200, 250, 300. The numbers became so statistically impossible that intelligence officers began to suspect either gross exaggeration or some form of record-keeping error. They assigned Captain Theodore Lawrence, a decorated Marine officer with a background in criminal investigation, to shadow Blackfeather for 2 weeks and verify the kill claims independently. Lawrence's confidential report, filed in March of 1944 and declassified in 1987, remains one of the most extraordinary documents in military history. Over 14 days operating with Blackfeather on Bougainville, Lawrence personally witnessed and confirmed 39 enemy kills. He also documented phenomena that he could not explain and admitted he did not expect anyone to believe. On the night of March 9th, Lawrence wrote, "I accompanied subject through enemy-held territory approximately 4 miles behind Japanese lines. We moved in complete darkness, no moon, heavy cloud cover. I could not see subject even when he was directly in front of me. I had to follow by sound, but he made no sound. I stumbled constantly. I knocked into branches, stepped on dry leaves. At one point, fell into a creek. Subject never made a single noise. We approached an enemy supply depot that intelligence had identified as housing approximately 40 soldiers. Subject stopped and remained motionless for what I estimate was 20 minutes. Then he whispered, 43 men, 3 officers. They just received ammunition resupply from the north. 2 of them are writing letters home. 1 is sick with fever and will die in 4 days, even if we do nothing. I will take 7. The rest are not my concern tonight. I asked him how he could possibly know these details. He said, "I can hear their hearts beating. I can smell their fear and their rice and their homesickness. The jungle tells me everything. You just have to know how to listen." Over the next hour, he fired 7 shots. 7 Japanese soldiers died, including all 3 officers. We withdrew without detection. The next morning, I verified through binoculars that the supply depot was in chaos, with soldiers examining their dead and clearly terrified of another attack. Everything subject said was accurate. I have no rational explanation for how he acquired this information. Lawrence's report continued with additional observations that grew increasingly unsettling. He described watching Black Feather predict artillery strikes before they occurred, sense enemy patrols from over a mile away, and on one occasion refused to take a shot at an enemy officer because, as Black Feather explained, he has 3 daughters, and his death would break something in the world that shouldn't be broken. Lawrence noted that the officer in question was killed 2 days later by a different American unit, and when they searched his body, they found photographs of 3 young girls in his wallet. "I am a rational man," Lawrence concluded his report. "I graduated from Princeton. I studied engineering and ballistics. I believe in mathematics and physics and the observable universe. But Thomas Black Feather operates by rules I do not understand. He is the most effective combat asset I have ever witnessed, and he is also the most disturbing. I do not believe he is entirely human anymore, if he ever was. The jungle has claimed him, or he has claimed it. The distinction no longer seems to matter. I recommend we allow him to continue operating without interference. I also recommend that we never, under any circumstances, attempt to replicate whatever he has become. Some doors should remain closed, but doors, once opened, are difficult to close. By mid-1944, military intelligence had become obsessed with understanding Black Feather's abilities. If one man could achieve 400-plus kills through methods that defied conventional combat doctrine, what could a unit of such men accomplish? What if his techniques could be taught, replicated, turned into a program that could create an entire division of ghost warriors? They established a research initiative, classified under the designation Project Nightwalker, and assigned a team of anthropologists, military psychologists, and special operations trainers to observe Black Feather and document every aspect of his methodology. The team was led by Dr. Elizabeth Harrow, a cultural anthropologist from Harvard, who had published extensively on Native American spiritual practices. Her initial reports were clinical, academic, focused on documenting Black Feather's pre-shot rituals and his use of what he called old knowledge from his Navajo upbringing. But as the study continued, Dr. Harrow's reports began to change in tone. The scientific detachment gave way to something closer to fear. In a personal letter to her sister dated August 3, 1944, later discovered in family archives, and published without authorization in 2009, Harrow wrote about experiences that shattered her academic worldview. "He took me into the jungle last night," Harrow wrote to her sister, "against every regulation, against all common sense. He said, if I wanted to understand, I had to see with different eyes. We walked for hours. I was terrified. I kept hearing movement all around us, kept thinking we would be captured or killed. But Thomas just kept walking, completely calm. And eventually I realized the sounds I was hearing were not Japanese soldiers. They were something else. Animals, I thought at first. But the sounds were wrong. They were too deliberate, too much like language. At one point, Thomas stopped and spoke in Navajo to the darkness. I swear to God, Sarah. Something spoke back. Not in Navajo. In a sound like wind through stone. And Thomas nodded like he understood. He turned to me and said, "They've agreed to let you witness, but you cannot tell others what you see. They will think you're insane, and they will be right to think so. Some truths are not meant for the daylight world." Then he took the shot. I did not see the target. I did not hear any enemy soldiers. But I heard the bullet impact, heard a body fall somewhere in the darkness nearly half a mile away. We found him the next morning. Japanese officer, shot through the heart. Thomas said he had been tracking that particular man for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. I asked what made this moment right. He said, his spirit was ready to leave. I just helped it along. I am submitting my final report to the project, and then I am requesting immediate transfer out of the Pacific Theater. I cannot continue this research. Thomas Blackfeather has access to something we should not be studying. Something old. Something that does not want to be understood by Western science. Dr. Harrow's transfer was approved within 72 hours. Project Nightwalker was quietly discontinued. The official explanation cited operational security concerns and resource reallocation to more pressing tactical priorities. But the real reason was buried in a memorandum from the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency, dated August 15, 1944. The memo, declassified under Freedom of Information Act requests in 1998, contained a single paragraph that ended all attempts to study or replicate Thomas Blackfeather's methods. Subject White Wolf represents an anomalous capability that exists outside standard military doctrine and psychological understanding. Multiple trained observers have reported phenomena that cannot be reconciled with known combat techniques or human physiological limits. Recommend immediate cessation of all research initiatives. Further study may expose personnel to psychological hazards that compromise operational effectiveness and mental stability. Subject should be allowed to continue independent operations without additional oversight. Do not attempt to weaponize or systematize his methods. Classification level raised to top secret with restricted access. But ending official research did not stop the stories. Throughout 1944 and into 1945, as American forces island-hopped toward Japan, Thomas Blackfeather became a legend that spread through the Pacific Theater like fever. Marines who had never served with him claimed to have seen him. Soldiers swore they had been saved by impossible shots that could only have come from the ghost. Japanese prisoners of war, when interrogated about American sniper tactics, spoke about the Shadow Walker, a spirit warrior who could not be killed because he was already dead, sent by the gods to punish the Empire for its arrogance. Private First Class Daniel Reeves, who landed at Peleliu in September of 1944, recorded his experiences in a diary that his family donated to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans in 2006. His entry from September 23rd describes an encounter that captured the growing mythology surrounding Blackfeather. "We were dug in on Bloody Nose Ridge," Reeves wrote. "The Japanese had us trapped. Every time we tried to advance, they cut us down. We had been stuck there for 18 hours. Guys were crying, praying, losing their minds. Our sergeant had been killed. Our lieutenant was wounded and unconscious. We were down to maybe 20 effectives out of a company that landed with over 200 men. Then someone started singing. It was a language I had never heard before, coming from somewhere in the rocks above us. The Japanese guns stopped firing. Complete silence. The singing continued for maybe 5 minutes, this strange, haunting sound that made my skin crawl and also made me feel safe at the same time, if that makes any sense. Then we heard a voice in English, echoing off the cliffs. "The path is clear. Move now. Follow the white stones. We looked around and saw that someone had arranged small white rocks in a line leading up the ridge, through what should have been a kill zone. We followed the stones. We made it to the top without a single casualty. When we got there, we found 37 dead Japanese soldiers, all shot from angles that should have been impossible. And in the center of their position, someone had left a single white feather stuck in the ground. We knew it was him, the ghost, the white wolf. He had saved us, and we never even saw him. The white feathers began appearing at multiple battle sites: Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippine campaigns, always in the aftermath of inexplicable enemy casualties, always in places where American forces had been saved from certain annihilation. The feathers became talismans. Men collected them, carried them into combat, believed they offered protection. The Marine Corps officially denied that any single individual was responsible for these occurrences, but unofficially, every Marine in the Pacific knew the truth. Thomas Blackfeather was killing the enemy at a rate that exceeded all mathematical probability. By January of 1945, his confirmed kill count reached 350. By April, it stood at 412. And then the war began to wind down. Germany surrendered in May. Japan was collapsing under the weight of American air superiority and the systematic destruction of its military capacity. Plans were being drawn for an invasion of the Japanese mainland, an operation that military planners estimated would cost over 1 million American casualties. Blackfeather was slated to be part of the initial invasion force. Special Operations Command had plans to insert him ahead of the main landing, to operate independently in Japanese territory and create chaos among enemy command structures. The invasion was scheduled for November of 1945. It never happened. On August 6th, an atomic bomb obliterated Hiroshima. 3 days later, another destroyed Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The war was over. Thomas Blackfeather's final confirmed kill occurred on August 13, 1945, on Okinawa. According to the after-action report filed by his commanding officer, Blackfeather engaged an enemy position that was preparing to execute a group of captured American pilots. The enemy soldiers were entrenched in a cave system that American forces had not yet reached. Blackfeather took the shot from a distance measured at 2,300 yards, nearly 1.3 miles, through heavy rain and wind. The bullet traveled for over 3 seconds before striking the Japanese officer who was about to execute the prisoners. The officer's death created enough confusion for the prisoners to escape during the chaos. All 5 pilots survived and returned to American lines. That shot brought Blackfeather's final confirmed total to 417 enemy kills. No American sniper before or since has approached this number. The closest comparisons come from other wars, other eras. Finnish sniper Simo Heiha, the famous White Death of the Winter War, claimed over 500 kills, but operated in vastly different terrain over a much longer period. Soviet snipers in Stalingrad racked up impressive numbers, but in an urban environment that provided very different tactical opportunities. Carlos Hathcock, the legendary Marine sniper in Vietnam, confirmed 93 kills. Chris Kyle, the American sniper, confirmed 160. Thomas Blackfeather's 417 confirmed kills in just 22 months of combat remains an anomaly that defies analysis. When the war ended, the Marine Corps attempted to bring Blackfeather home for a hero's welcome, for medals and parades and recognition. He refused. According to Lieutenant Colonel Webb, who remained in contact with Blackfeather until Webb's death in 1981, the sniper simply disappeared from his unit on Okinawa in late August of 1945. He walked away from the base camp one evening and never returned. A massive search was conducted. The island was still dangerous, still harbored Japanese holdouts, who refused to surrender. Webb feared Blackfeather had been captured or killed. Then, 3 weeks later, a telegram arrived at Marine Corps headquarters in Washington. It had been sent from Los Angeles and contained only 13 words. "The spirits say the war is over. I am going home. Thank you for understanding." The Marine Corps officially listed Thomas Blackfeather as absent without leave, then later changed his status to honorable discharge under unusual circumstances. There was no court-martial, no investigation. The file was simply closed and buried in the classified archives that would not be opened for nearly 4 decades. But the story did not end there. It evolved. It metastasized into something stranger and more disturbing than anything that had happened during the war. Because Thomas Blackfeather did not go home to the Navajo Nation. At least, not immediately. Between September of 1945 and March of 1946, there were reported sightings of him across the western United States, in New Mexico, in Colorado, in Utah and Nevada. Always in remote areas, always in places where something violent had recently occurred. The first report came from a sheriff in Gallup, New Mexico, dated September 28, 1945. The sheriff had been investigating a series of murders in the mountains north of the city. 7 men had been found dead over a 2-week period, all shot with extreme precision, all involved in what the investigation later revealed was a criminal organization trafficking weapons stolen from military bases. The sheriff's report described finding a witness, a young Navajo woman who had been held captive by the organization, traumatized but alive. She told the sheriff that a tall man with eyes like amber had appeared in the night, killed all 7 men within minutes, and freed her without speaking a single word. When shown photographs of military personnel who might match the description, she pointed to Thomas Blackfeather's service photo. Similar incidents occurred throughout the autumn and winter of 1945. In Durango, Colorado, a group of men who had been terrorizing Native American families was found dead in their headquarters, all killed by a single shooter. In Flagstaff, Arizona, a corrupt Indian affairs agent who had been embezzling funds meant for reservation communities died of a gunshot wound fired from 3/4 of a mile away. In Las Vegas, Nevada, which was still a small desert town in those days, 3 casino owners who had been exploiting Native American workers were found dead in the desert, arranged in a circle with white feathers placed on their chests. Local law enforcement investigated these incidents as separate cases. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took interest when patterns began to emerge. In January of 1946, Special Agent Carl Jennings was assigned to coordinate the investigation. His reports, partially declassified in 2012 with significant redactions, revealed an agency struggling to comprehend what they were dealing with. "All victims share common characteristics," Jennings wrote. They were involved in criminal enterprises that specifically targeted Native American populations. They were killed by a shooter of exceptional skill. Ballistics analysis indicates the same rifle was used in at least 11 of the 16 murders under investigation. The weapon is consistent with a military-issue Springfield Model 1903 standard sniper rifle from World War II. We have identified one person of interest, former Marine Thomas Blackfeather, whose service record indicates the necessary skills. However, witness descriptions of the shooter vary wildly. Some describe a tall Native American man. Others report seeing a figure that seemed to shift and blur, like heat shimmer. One witness claimed the shooter appeared to be surrounded by animal shapes, though this witness was later determined to be intoxicated. Attempts to locate Blackfeather have been unsuccessful. His last known location was Okinawa, in August of 1945. No records exist of him returning to the continental United States through official channels. It is as if he simply materialized in New Mexico and has been moving through the Southwest like a ghost. The FBI investigation intensified through the early months of 1946. They interviewed hundreds of people across 5 states. They coordinated with military intelligence, hoping to leverage classified information from Blackfeather's wartime activities. But every lead ended in frustration. Witnesses couldn't provide consistent descriptions. Physical evidence was minimal. And the killings were so precise, so professionally executed, that even hardened FBI agents admitted they had never seen anything like it. Then, in March of 1946, the killings stopped. Thomas Blackfeather appeared at the Red Mesa trading post on the Navajo Nation Reservation in Arizona. He walked through the front door in the middle of the day, purchased supplies with cash, and spoke briefly with the elderly Navajo woman who ran the store. She later told investigators that Blackfeather looked tired, but at peace. He said he had finished what needed to be finished. He said the spirits had released him from his obligation. He asked about his grandmother and was informed she had passed away the previous winter. The woman said Blackfeather showed no emotion at this news, simply nodded and said, "Then I am truly alone now." That was the last confirmed sighting of Thomas Blackfeather. He walked out of the trading post and vanished into the desert. The FBI searched the reservation for 6 months. They interviewed every family, checked every hogan, investigated every lead. They found nothing. No body. No evidence of where he might have gone. No explanation for how a man could simply disappear so completely. The official investigation was closed in September of 1946, with a notation that the subject had likely died in the desert and his remains would probably never be recovered. But, unofficially, among the agents who had pursued him, a different narrative took hold. They believed Thomas Blackfeather had not died. They believed he had returned to something older than death, something that existed in the spaces between the modern world and the ancient one. They believed, though none would say so in official reports, that the jungle had never really released him, that whatever he had become during the war remained what he was, and that he was still out there, watching, waiting, protecting, in ways they could not understand. Over the decades that followed, there were occasional reports that fit the pattern. Unexplained deaths of criminals who preyed on Native American communities. Impossible shots taken from distances that exceeded human capability. White feathers found at crime scenes where justice had been served in ways the legal system could not provide. None of these incidents were ever officially connected to Thomas Blackfeather. But among certain communities, among people who understood that the world contained mysteries deeper than what could be measured or documented, the stories persisted. In 1982, when a researcher stumbled upon Blackfeather's classified file while investigating unrelated matters, it sparked renewed interest. Journalists attempted to track down people who had known him. Veterans from his unit were interviewed for oral history projects. The Navajo Nation was contacted for information about his family and background. What they discovered raised more questions than it answered. According to tribal records, Thomas Blackfeather had been born in Red Mesa in 1921, exactly as his military file indicated. But his birth was not recorded in any state or federal documentation. His family had no official legal existence. His grandmother, who supposedly raised him, was described by those who remembered her as a medicine woman of significant power, someone who knew the old ways and taught them to her grandson, despite the efforts of government schools to erase such knowledge. Multiple Navajo elders, when interviewed about Blackfeather, gave responses that suggested they knew more than they were willing to share with outsiders. One elder, speaking on condition of anonymity to a researcher from the University of New Mexico in 1985, provided a statement that captured the complexity of Blackfeather's legacy within his own community. "You want to know about the one you call Thomas Blackfeather," the elder said, speaking through a translator. "But that is not his real name. His real name is sacred, given to him by the spirits, and we do not share it with those who would not understand. What I can tell you is this: he was born for a purpose. His grandmother saw it in the stars before he came into this world. She saw the war coming. She saw the need for someone who could walk between the worlds, someone who could protect the people using the old knowledge. She prepared him from childhood. She taught him to see without eyes, to hear without ears, to become invisible when necessary, to ask the land for permission before taking life. These are not things your science can explain or your military can replicate. These are gifts from the sacred, given only to those who are worthy, and only when the people have great need. During the war, our people served with honor. Many died far from home. Thomas walked among the dead and the dying. He carried their spirits back to the land. He was not just a warrior. He was a guardian of souls. When the war ended, he had one more duty to fulfill. There were those who had harmed the people while our men were away fighting. There were those who thought they could prey on the weak and the vulnerable. Thomas found them. He balanced the scales. And then, when justice was served, he returned to the land. Not to die, to transform, to become what he was always meant to be. The researcher asked what that meant, what Blackfeather had become. The elder smiled and shook his head. "You would not believe me if I told you," the elder said. "And even if you believed, you would not understand. Some men become legends. Some legends become spirits. Some spirits become the land itself. Thomas Blackfeather is in the mountains now. He is in the desert wind. He is in the shadows where predators lurk, and in the light that guides the lost home. He watches over the people still, and when there is need, when true evil walks among us, he will act again. You cannot find him because he is everywhere and nowhere. You cannot speak with him because he speaks now in the language of earth and stone. But he is there. He is always there. And those who would harm the innocent should fear the desert night, because the white wolf never truly sleeps. The research into Thomas Blackfeather's life and disappearance has continued sporadically over the past 4 decades. Each new generation of historians and investigators discovers the same frustrating truth. The evidence exists. The testimony is credible. The numbers are documented in official military records, but the explanation remains forever out of reach. How does one man kill 417 enemy soldiers in 22 months in some of the most difficult combat terrain in history? How does he do so while exhibiting capabilities that seem to violate known human limitations? How does he then vanish so completely that not even the full resources of the United States government can locate him? There are theories, of course. Some researchers argue that Blackfeather's kill count was exaggerated, that military record-keeping in the chaos of the Pacific War was unreliable, that his legend grew larger than his reality. But these arguments crumble when confronted with the sheer volume of corroborating testimony from multiple independent sources, all describing the same impossible feats. Others suggest that Blackfeather possessed some form of undiagnosed savant syndrome, neurological abnormalities that granted him superhuman perceptual abilities. But this theory fails to explain the spiritual elements, the phenomena witnessed by trained observers who had no reason to fabricate or exaggerate. And then there are those who simply accept that Thomas Blackfeather was exactly what the witnesses described, something more than human, someone who had been touched by forces that exist outside the boundaries of conventional understanding. These researchers, often dismissed as credulous or unscientific, point to similar figures throughout history. Warriors who seemed unkillable, hunters who never missed, protectors who appeared when needed and vanished when their work was done. Every culture has such stories. Perhaps, they argue, these are not mere myths. Perhaps they are evidence of something real, something that emerges in times of great need, something that walks the line between the material and the spiritual. The truth, if such a thing exists in this case, remains elusive. The classified files are incomplete. The witnesses are aging and dying, taking their memories to graves scattered across the country. The Navajo elders who knew the deeper story guard their knowledge carefully, sharing it only within their community according to protocols established long before the United States existed. And somewhere in the American Southwest, in mountains and deserts that have kept secrets for millennia, the question persists: what became of Thomas Blackfeather? There was a report in 2019 from a park ranger in the Chusca Mountains of New Mexico. The ranger had been investigating reports of illegal hunting on protected land. He found 3 men dead at a remote campsite. All had been shot with extraordinary precision. All had been involved, according to subsequent investigation, in a human trafficking operation that moved victims through the reservation. The ranger's report mentioned finding a single white feather at the scene. No weapon was recovered. No shooter was ever identified. The case remains officially unsolved. There was another incident in 2022. A young Navajo woman, missing for 6 weeks and presumed dead, walked into a police station in Farmington, New Mexico. She was disoriented, but alive. She said she had been held captive by a drug cartel operating along the Arizona-New Mexico border. She said her captors had been planning to kill her. Then, one night, she said, someone came. A tall figure that moved like smoke. Her captors died before they could scream. The figure had released her, pointed toward the lights of distant Farmington, and vanished back into the darkness. When shown historical photographs as part of the investigation, she pointed to a picture of a Marine in World War II uniform. She said, "That's him. That's exactly him. He hasn't aged at all." These incidents, and others like them, filter through law enforcement databases and reservation communities with a strange kind of inevitability. They are never officially connected. The authorities who investigate them rarely put the pieces together, but those who know the stories, those who understand the history, they recognize the pattern. Thomas Blackfeather, the White Wolf, subject of Project Nightwalker, the ghost of Guadalcanal, the most lethal sniper in American military history, did not die in the desert in 1946. He is still out there, still protecting, still watching, still impossibly accurate, still impossible to find. The native sniper with absurd accuracy in World War II became something beyond war, beyond accuracy, beyond explanation. He became a guardian spirit walking in human form, or a human who learned to walk as spirits do. The distinction no longer matters. What matters is that evil still walks in this world. And where evil walks, so too does justice, silent and certain, arriving on wings you cannot hear until it is far too late. The story of Thomas Blackfeather is a reminder that this world contains depths we have forgotten how to see. It contains powers we have dismissed as superstition. It contains warriors who fight not for glory or medals or recognition, but because the land itself calls them to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In our modern age of technology and rationalism, we have tried to eliminate mystery from the world. We have tried to measure and quantify everything, to reduce all phenomena to data points and scientific explanations. But some truths resist our instruments. Some heroes operate in shadows, too deep for our cameras to penetrate. Some protectors require no recognition because they answer to authorities older and more demanding than any government or military command. Thomas Blackfeather served his country with honor. He saved countless American lives. And then he served something even greater, the ancient covenant between the land and those who truly belong to it, who understand that we do not own the earth but are owned by it, that we do not command the spirits but are commanded by them. If you walk in the desert tonight or in the mountains of the Southwest, listen carefully. You might hear singing in a language that predates English, that predates even the arrival of humans to this continent. You might see movement in the shadows that is not quite animal and not quite human. You might feel, just for a moment, that you are being watched by something that wishes you no harm but will tolerate no evil in its presence. That is Thomas Blackfeather. That is the white wolf. That is the native sniper whose accuracy was never absurd, just absolute. And he is still taking aim, still protecting, still hunting those who hunt the innocent. In the end, we are left with a choice. We can dismiss this story as legend, as myth, as the exaggerations of war-weary soldiers, and the fantasies of those who wish the world contained more magic than it does. Or we can accept that reality is stranger and deeper than our comfortable explanations allow. We can accept that some men are called to become more than men. We can accept that the price of such transformation is to leave the human world behind, to become something eternal and watchful and unseen. Whatever you choose to believe, remember this: 417 confirmed kills, 22 months of combat, 0 wounds received, disappeared without a trace. The numbers do not lie. The witnesses do not lie. The files exist. The white feathers still appear. And somewhere in the American Southwest, a rifle that should have been decommissioned in 1945 is still being fired with impossible accuracy by hands that perhaps are no longer entirely human. May we all find protectors when we need them. May we all have the wisdom to recognize that protection comes in forms we do not expect. And may we never forget that the greatest warriors are not those who fight for glory, but those who fight because they cannot stand by while others suffer. That is the legacy of Thomas Blackfeather. That is the story of the native sniper with absurd accuracy. That is the truth that defies explanation and demands respect. Walk carefully in the wild places. Honor the land. Protect the innocent. And if you ever find yourself in desperate need, in a moment where all hope seems lost, look to the shadows. Look to the ridgeline. Look to the places where civilization ends and something older begins. Because the white wolf is watching, and his aim has never failed. In these troubled times, when darkness seems to press in from all sides, when evil masquerades as righteousness and justice seems forever delayed, we need stories that remind us that good still fights, still wins, still protects. We need to remember that there are forces in this universe greater than our understanding, powers that align with righteousness and truth. Whether you call it the spirits of the land, the hand of God, or the indomitable human will to protect the innocent, it exists, it acts, it never surrenders. So I leave you with this: seek the divine protection that has been offered to humanity since the beginning. Put your faith in God and in Jesus Christ, who walked among us as the ultimate protector, who gave his life so that others might live. The same Spirit that guided Thomas Blackfeather, that made him a guardian of the helpless, is available to all who seek it. Walk in faith. Stand against evil. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. And know that you are never alone in that fight. The protectors are always watching. The warriors of light never rest. And justice, though sometimes delayed, is always absolutely accurate in its aim.